The millionaire came to evict, but almost cried when he saw the girl caring for her sick brother. The air on the 72nd floor of the Mendes Corp building was rarefied and expensive. It smelled of glass, polished steel, and above all, power. This was the domain of Victor Mendes, an architect of empires whose raw materials were not brick or mortar, but capital, ambition, and a complete absence of sentimentality. Seated in his Italian leather chair, which resembled a minimalist throne, Victor didn't see the city of São Paulo sprawling below him as a home to millions, but as a three-dimensional chessboard where he moved his pieces with the precision of a grandmaster. If you enjoy this type of story, please subscribe to the channel and help us grow. I appreciate all your support. His gaze was fixed not on the cityscape, but on the holograms floating above the ebony surface of his desk. Gantt charts, cash flow projections, and risk analyses danced in the air, composing the silent symphony of his newest opus, the Vertex Complex. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement. $200 million converted into a tower of glass and titanium that would pierce the sky, redefining the city's skyline, and more importantly, generating a 38% return on investment in 6 years. Numbers were the only poetry Victor understood. He swiped a finger through the air, enlarging a small red blotch on the project map, an irritating pixel, an anomaly in his spreadsheet of perfection. The blotch represented a 400-square-meter plot, insignificant in scale, but monumental in its obstructive capacity. It was the Silva family residence. Dr. Almeida, Victor's voice cut through the silence of the office. It was a low, emotionless tone, but one that carried the weight of an unquestionable order. From the other end of the vast room, a man in an impeccable suit and graying hair approached, holding a tablet. Dr. Almeida, head of the Mendes Corp legal department for 15 years, knew that tone. It was the sound that preceded the eradication of a problem. Mr. Mendes, the status of eviction notice 78B report. Almeida cleared his throat, a nervous tic he'd never been able to eliminate in the presence of his boss. The Silva family, sir. They received the third and final notice 10 days ago. The legal deadline for voluntary eviction expired yesterday at 6 p.m. They haven't left. Victor remained silent for a moment, his icy grey eyes still fixed on the red blotch on the map. He showed no anger or frustration. Emotions were liabilities, unnecessary variables in a business equation. What he felt was a slight annoyance, like that of a watchmaker who finds a grain of dust jamming a complex gear. "The eviction order has been issued?" he asked without looking away. "Yes, sir. Signed by the judge first thing this morning. Law enforcement can be called in to ensure execution at any time. It's all in my hands." Victor finally leaned back in his chair, the leather emitting a low, satisfied sigh. He interlaced his fingers, their tips touching to form a miniature tower. "No, I'll go there myself." Dr. Almeida blinked, genuinely surprised. It was the first time in a decade that Victor Mendes would personally involve himself in such a mundane matter. Evictions were for the pawns, for the legal infantry. A king doesn't abandon his castle to move a minor piece. "Sir, with all due respect, there's no need. It's standard procedure. My assistants can oversee everything. You have a meeting with the Japanese investors at 3 o'clock. Cancel it," Victor said, standing up. Tall and broad-shouldered, his charcoal grey suit looked like modern armor. He walked to the glass wall, placing his hands behind his back. I want to understand the kind of irrationality that leads someone to stand in the way of $200 million for a piece of land that barely costs as much to remove." To Almeida, that sounded like a colossal waste of time. To Victor, it was a matter of principle. Inefficiency offended him. The Silva family's refusal to accept the purchase offer, which was 30% above market value, and now to comply with a court order, was a system failure, an anomaly he needed to observe closely, like a scientist studying a stubborn bacterium under a microscope. An hour later, Victor's luxury German sedan, black and silent as a panther, glided out of the upscale neighborhoods and plunged into the arteries of an older, more worn-out São Paulo. The bulletproof glass isolated him from the noise, smells, and disorder of the street, but not from the sight of the urban decay he so despised. Low buildings with peeling facades, graffiti, and a tangle of electrical wires. To Victor, it was chaos, begging for the order he and his projects brought. The car stopped in front of a small, rusty iron gate. Behind it, a simple one-story house with walls that were once white and a small garden struggling to survive amidst weeds. It was the red mark, the speck of dust. The driver opened the door. Victor stepped out and the heavier, more humid afternoon air hit him. He adjusted his jacket, the expensive fabric seeming out of place in that environment. He looked at the house with the same disdain he would look at a poorly formatted spreadsheet. It was an error to be corrected, a past to be demolished, to make way for the bright and lucrative future he had designed. With firm and determined steps, he walked towards the gate, his shadow stretching long over the neglected garden. His mind was already on the next step, the call to the demolition crew, as soon as the property was empty. He didn't come to negotiate. He came to close a chapter, erase a mistake and continue his inexorable march of progress and profit. Victor pushed open the iron gate. It groaned in protest, a high-pitched sound that seemed to tear through the street's quietude. The latch was broken. There was no barrier. To Victor, this was the first sign of negligence. An unprotected asset is a worthless asset. He crossed the cracked cement path, where weeds stubbornly grew through the fissures, and stopped before the faded wooden door. There was no doorbell. He raised his hand and knocked with his knuckles twice. The sound was dry, hard, a sound that didn't belong in that place. He expected shouts. A corpulent, enraged man, a weeping woman, perhaps even the threat of calling the police, unaware that the police, if called, would be on his side. He expected a disorderly and emotional confrontation, the kind of human inefficiency he so despised and that always confirmed his worldview. The door opened, but not entirely, just a crack, and in the space appeared not an adult, but a child's face. It was a girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, small for her age. She had long brown hair, tied in a loose ponytail and pale skin. But it was her eyes that stopped Victor. They were a dark, serious brown, and lacked the spark of curiosity or fear one would expect from a child facing an imposing stranger. There was an ancient gravity in them, a weariness that didn't belong to her age. Yes? Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but firm. The unexpected formality disarmed him for a split second. He recomposed himself, his own voice coming out harsher than he intended, a defense mechanism to regain control. "I'm Victor Mendes. I'm looking for those responsible for this property." The girl didn't flinch. She just stared at him, and for a moment, Victor had the disconcerting impression that she was measuring and evaluating him in the same way he measured and evaluated land or a financial statement. "My parents aren't here," she replied. "I'm Sophia." "Hi, Sophia," he repeated, the name sounding strange in his mouth. "Listen, Sophia, this property now belongs to Mendes Corp. You received the notifications. The deadline for eviction has passed. You need to leave." He expected the mention of the word eviction to trigger tears, panic. Instead, Sophia's expression became even more exhausted. She sighed, a small, heavy sound. "I know who you are. We received the papers." She then looked over her shoulder into the dark house. "Could you please not shout? My brother is trying to sleep. He can't be agitated." That request, made with such direct simplicity, was the second crack in his armor of certainties. She wasn't defending the house. She was defending her brother. Before he could formulate a response, she opened the door wider. "Come in, but please quietly." Hesitant for the first time that day, Victor crossed the threshold. The interior of the house was dark, with almost all the curtains drawn. It smelled of a mixture of dust, cleaning products, and something else, a clinical antiseptic odor he couldn't immediately identify. The living room was small, the furniture sparse and worn, an armchair with frayed fabric, a bookshelf with few books and some porcelain knickknacks, a faded rug. There was poverty there, but also a meticulous cleanliness, an order that fought against the decay. And in the center of the room, where a coffee table should have been, there was a makeshift bed assembled on the sofa. On it, lying under a thin blanket, was a boy. He was even smaller than Sophia, terribly pale, with dark, deep hollows under his closed eyes. Next to the sofa, a small bedside table was covered with medicine boxes, a glass of water, and a small device that emitted a low, constant hum and had a display with green numbers. Victor stopped, suddenly conscious of his own presence there, large, dark, and intrusive. He looked from the frail figure on the bed to Sophia, who was already beside her brother, touching his forehead with the back of her hand, a professional, instinctive gesture. "This is Lucas," she whispered. "He's sick. What's wrong with him?" The question escaped Victor before he could contain it. It was an irrelevant question to his business, a human variable that shouldn't enter the equation. Sophia turned to him, her eyes fixed on his. "He has chronic kidney failure. His kidneys have failed." The phrase fell into the silence of the room with disproportionate weight. Kidney failure. That device beside the bed. The antiseptic smell. The pieces clicked into place in Victor's mind with an unpleasant snap. This wasn't a simple cold. It was a sentence. And his parents? he insisted, the need to understand this anomaly overcoming his initial purpose. "You can't stay here alone with him. My mother is in the hospital. She spends the day there because sometimes Lucas needs a transfusion, and she's a donor. And she just needs to be near him," Sophia explained, with the same naturalness with which she would report the weather. "My father is working. He got a second job at night at a bakery so we can pay for the medicines that the insurance doesn't cover. He leaves at dawn and comes back late at night." Victor fell silent. His world, a universe of contracts, financial leverage, and market projections, suddenly seemed to shrink until it became a ridiculous and insignificant abstraction. The cold logic that governed him collided with a wall of reality so brutal that it left him speechless. He had come to execute an eviction order against a stubborn and irrational family. What he found was an 11-year-old girl acting as nurse, housekeeper, and guardian to her dying brother, while her parents struggled desperately for survival. He watched Sophia take a pill blister pack, carefully select one, consult an old alarm clock on the shelf, and place the medicine in a small cup to crush it. Her movements were economical, practiced. She was a child performing adult tasks with a competence that frightened him. Suddenly, a soft alarm beeped from the device next to Lucas. Beep, beep, beep. Sophia wasn't startled. She moved quickly, pressed a button to silence the sound, and checked the numbers on the display. The boy in the bed stirred, letting out a low moan. "Shh, Lou, it's okay," she whispered, adjusting his pillow. "It was just the alarm. Go back to sleep." The boy calmed down at the sound of her voice. Victor remained motionless by the door, a giant in an expensive suit completely impotent and out of place. He who controlled a $200 million empire, who bent boards of directors and city halls to his will, had absolutely no power in that room. The authority there, absolute and unquestionable, was that of the girl with tired eyes. He had come to remove an obstacle, but the obstacle wasn't a house of brick and tile. It was a sister's love, a family's struggle, a reality so raw and powerful that his eviction notice seemed like a dirty, irrelevant piece of paper. The broken expectation wasn't just about finding no resistance, it was about finding in its place a form of strength he had never known, and for which he had no defense. Time in that small, dark room seemed to have its own density. For Victor, accustomed to a schedule broken down into 6-minute blocks, each second there stretched, heavy and filled with a silence that screamed louder than any fire alarm in his corporate tower. He remained by the door, a spectre from a different world, while Sophia finished caring for her brother. Her gestures were a silent ballet of efficiency and affection, a combination Victor's analytical mind struggled to process. He should leave. He should turn around, get into his air-conditioned car, call Dr. Almeida and say, "The problem is more complex. Postpone the execution." That was the logical move, the maneuver of a strategist who finds a minefield and retreats to reassess. But his feet, encased in 4,000 real leather shoes, seemed nailed to the worn cement floor. Leaving would mean leaving that girl, that child with overburdened shoulders, alone to face the night. And for the first time in his adult life, the cold logic of business was challenged by an impulse he barely recognized, a sharp, almost painful pang of human responsibility. Sophia, having made sure Lucas was stable, turned to him. The exhaustion on her face was now more visible in the dim light filtering through the crack in the curtain. "He's still here," she stated, without accusation. "You're not going to call the police to get rid of us, are you?" "Not now." Victor opened his mouth, but the words that usually came so easily, legal procedures, property rights, contractual inevitability, sounded hollow and absurd in his own mind. "No," he said, and the single word seemed to require an immense physical effort. "Not today." He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was a thin device, a sliver of technology that seemed obscenely advanced in that setting. With 2 taps, he cleared his schedule for the rest of the day. Meeting with the Japanese cancelled. Dinner with the bank president cancelled. Investment portfolio review indefinitely postponed. Each tap was a small act of rebellion against the man he had been an hour before. "Where's the house phone?" he asked Sophia. She pointed to a yellowish phone on a small table in the corner. He walked over, the sound of his shoes on the floor the only thing breaking the silence. He called Dr. Almeida. "Almeida." His voice was low, controlled. "The operation on Lot 78B is suspended." There was silence on the other end of the line. Victor could imagine the confusion on his lawyer's face. "Suspended, sir? Is there a legal issue?" "Just suspend it. I don't want any activity at the site. No calls, no visits. Cancel the execution order, understood?" Yes, sir. But what about the investors, the schedule?" "The schedule is mine now," Victor cut him off, "and I'm busy." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Turning around, he saw Sophia watching him, her large, serious eyes trying to decipher him. "Your father, does he have a cell phone number?" Victor asked. "He does, but he can't answer at work. It's forbidden at the factory, and at the bakery he only has a break, very late." "And your mother?" "Her phone is out of battery. She only calls from the hospital when she needs something urgent." The island of isolation in which those children lived was almost absolute. Victor felt a chill that didn't come from the room's temperature. It was the chasm of vulnerability opening before him. "Have you eaten dinner?" he asked. Sophia shook her head. "I'll eat later. I need to keep an eye on Lucas's equipment. Sometimes the catheter gives problems." Victor looked at the kitchen, separated from the living room only by a counter. It was tiny, an old refrigerator, a 2-burner stove. He walked over, opened the refrigerator. Inside, the reality was even more stark. A pitcher of water, some eggs, half a bell pepper, a container of cooked rice and another with beans. It was the fuel to keep that survival machine running. He, a man whose meals were prepared by chefs and served on china, felt a hunger that wasn't of the stomach. It was a hunger for action, for imposing order on the chaos, for doing something. "Stay with your brother," he said, the decision solidifying in his mind. "I'll take care of this." He didn't wait for an answer. He returned to his car, ignoring the driver's confused look, and drove to the nearest supermarket. Moving through the aisles with fierce determination, he filled a cart not with the organic and imported products he consumed, but with the basics: rice, beans, pasta, chicken, vegetables, fruit, milk, bread. Wavelengths different from his normal life. And on impulse he bought a teddy bear and a drawing pad with colored pencils, items that had no ROI, no tangible value on his life spreadsheet. When he returned an hour later, night had fallen. The house seemed even smaller and more vulnerable in the darkness. He entered carrying the bags and found Sophia exactly where he'd left her, a small sentinel beside her brother's bed. Without saying a word, Victor started cooking. He wasn't a cook, but he was a man who followed processes. He vaguely remembered how his grandmother made chicken soup decades ago, before his life became antiseptic and outsourced. He chopped the vegetables with surgical precision, sautéed the chicken, measured the rice. The smell of the food spread through the house, a warm, homely aroma that fought against the clinical smell of illness. Sophia watched him silently, an expression of astonishment and distrust on her face. When the soup was ready, Victor served a bowl to her. "Eat," he ordered, but his tone was gentle. She ate, hesitant at first, then with the genuine hunger of a child. While she ate, Victor sat in the worn armchair, the most uncomfortable place he'd sat in years, and simply observed. He observed the routine of that house. He watched Sophia check the IV drip, note Lucas's temperature in a small notebook, wipe her brother's face with a damp cloth. He witnessed the fear in her eyes when Lucas had a coughing fit, and the superhuman resilience with which she calmed him. He saw the loneliness in her slumped shoulders when she thought he wasn't looking. He who prided himself on being ruthless felt his steel facade not just crumble, but melt under the heat of that silent demonstration of love and duty. Success, he thought. He had always measured it in square footage built, in digits in his bank account, in the height of his buildings. But there in that poor living room, he was witnessing a kind of success that humbled him, the success of keeping a brother alive for one more night, the success of not collapsing under a weight that would crush most adults. When their father, Robert, arrived around midnight, he was the picture of exhaustion. A thin man, his face etched with worry, stopped in the doorway, his eyes wide at the sight of a stranger in an expensive suit in his living room. Victor stood and explained concisely and without his usual arrogance who he was and why he was there. He saw the suspicion in the man's eyes transform into even greater confusion, and then into a reluctant gratitude when Sophia said, "Dad, he made us soup, and he said he won't evict us." Victor didn't leave. He told Roberto to rest, that he would keep watch. He spent the night awake in that armchair, listening to Lucas's labored breathing and the hum of the machine. In the cold São Paulo dawn, the real estate titan, the man who moved millions with a phone call, learned to distinguish the sounds of the different alarms on the monitoring machine. For a few hours he became part of that crisis ecosystem. As the first ray of sun, pale and grey, entered the window, Victor Mendez was no longer the same man who had arrived the day before. The immersion in that daily struggle had been a baptism. His humanity, long dormant under layers of profit and ambition, had been forcibly awakened, and with it, a new question began to form in his mind, a question that would shake the foundations of his empire. What, in fact, is success? And what would he, Victor Mendez, build from now on? The meeting room on the 72nd floor resembled a cryogenic chamber. The air, maintained at exactly 19 degrees Celsius, was the same. The 20-seat black mahogany table continued to reflect the ceiling like a dark mirror, and the panoramic city view was still a testament to the power concentrated there. However, for Victor, everything was different. The space, once his natural habitat, now seemed sterile, artificial, almost hostile. The memory of the small silver house, with its smell of disinfectant and chicken soup, was etched in his mind, overlaying the antiseptic nature of his own empire. He was late, a capital offense in his code of conduct. The 6 main investors were already at the table. They were the sharks swimming in his waters, men and women who, like him, spoke the language of compound interest and return on net worth. Upon entering, a heavy silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to him, and they were not looks of respect but of assessment of the hunt. They smelled an anomaly in the water, the inexplicable postponement of the Vertex project. At the center of the opposition was Kenji Ishikawa, a second-generation tech magnate whose politeness was as sharp as a katana blade. He was the first to speak, his soft voice barely concealing the steel beneath. "Victor, glad you could join us. We were beginning to calculate the contractual penalty for the 48-hour delay in the demolition schedule." Victor didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, a general before a skeptical war council. He looked at each of them, from Ishikawa to Beatriz Lacerda, the heiress of a construction company who saw philanthropy as a marketing tool, and to Samuel Bastos, a corpulent financier who believed a company's only social responsibility was to increase its profits. "There will be no demolition," Victor said. His voice was calm but resonated with a new weight, a gravity that made them straighten in their chairs. "The Vertex complex is cancelled." A murmur of shock ran through the room. Samuel Bastos let out an incredulous laugh. "Cancelled? Victor, you spent 2 years putting this operation together. We have $200 million allocated, approved licenses, signed supply contracts. Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I never joke about money, Samuel. You know that," Victor retorted, his gaze fixed on Bastos. The Vertex, as conceived, was a flawed project, a generic luxury skyscraper with a good profit margin, but soulless, without a real differentiator. A glass and steel dinosaur. Our market is saturated with dinosaurs. Ishikawa narrowed his eyes. "What are you proposing then? That we simply absorb millions in losses and call it a day? Have you hit your head, Mendez?" Victor activated the holographic projector on the table, but instead of the Vertex's blueprints and financial projections, what appeared in the air was a blank screen. "I'm not proposing a loss, I'm proposing an evolution, a project that will not only give us a superior long-term financial return, but that will create a new paradigm in the luxury real estate market. A project that has what all the others lack, a purpose." He began to outline his vision. His voice, normally a monotone of data and facts, took on an inflection of passion that none of those present had ever heard. He described a high-end residential complex, yes, with all the luxuries money can buy, but with a pulsating and unexpected heart. Imagine a condominium where the main amenity is not the infinity pool or the state-of-the-art gym, although we will have those. The main amenity is life. Tranquility. Integrated into the complex, we will have one of the most advanced renal treatment wings in the country, not a hospital, but a wellness and dialysis center, managed in partnership with St. Luke's Hospital, focused on providing cutting-edge treatment in a residential setting. Beatriz Lacerda frowned. "A luxury hospital. It's an interesting niche, but the regulatory complexity—" "It's not a hospital," Victor corrected. "It's a home for those who need continuous care. Think about our target audience. How many millionaires and billionaires don't have someone in their families, an elderly parent, a relative, suffering from chronic illnesses? We won't be selling apartments. We'll be selling peace of mind. We will sell the certainty that your loved ones will receive the best possible care, just steps from home, without the coldness of a hospital environment." Silence fell over the room, a silence of pure astonishment. Samuel Bastos shook his head in disbelief. "This is madness. It's charity disguised as business. The construction and maintenance costs of a medical facility are astronomical. This will decimate our profit margins. And the family? The reason you halted a $200 million operation? Where do they fit in?" That was the question everyone wanted to ask. Victor took a deep breath. He knew this was the decisive moment. "The Silva family is the cornerstone. Patient zero, if you will," he said, looking directly at Bastos. The father, Roberto Silva, has an integrity and work ethic I rarely see. He will be trained for a position in the condominium's administration. The family will receive an apartment in the residential wing, and the son, Lucas, will be the first patient treated at our center, free of charge. An uproar of objections erupted. Philanthropy! Absurd! You're risking our money out of sentimentality. Ishikawa raised his hand, silencing the others. His eyes were slits of ice. Victor, shall be direct. What happened to you on that land? You went there to remove an obstacle and returned as a messiah. We invested in the relentless Victor Mendez, the shark who always delivers profit. Who are you now? Victor slowly walked around the table, his presence dominating the room. I am the same man, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The same man who understands that the greatest risk is not innovating, but becoming obsolete. You speak of sentimentality. I speak of branding. I speak of narrative. What story would the Vertex complex tell? Another building for the rich. What story will this new project, the Novo Amanhecha Residence, tell? A place that cares, a place that heals, a home where life is valued above all else. That story, gentlemen, sells. It sells to an audience that already has everything and now seeks meaning. It sells to the press. It creates a legacy. He stopped in front of Bastos. You see a cost. I see an investment in marketing of incalculable value. The Silva family's story will not be a secret. It will be our symbol. Proof that we are not just stacking bricks, we are building a community. And if it fails, Bastos shouted, if the medical center is a money pit, if the public doesn't buy into your narrative, here Victor played his final card, the bet that would define his future. I trust this project so much that I'm restructuring my participation. I will increase my personal investment by 50%, buying out anyone who wants to leave now. I personally guarantee a minimum return of 15% in the first 5 years. I'm taking the risk, because I know it's not a risk, it's a certainty. The room fell into absolute silence. That was unprecedented. Victor Mendez wasn't just proposing an idea, he was putting his own fortune on the line in a way he'd never done before. He was betting everything. The tension was palpable. The investors exchanged glances. Greed battled fear, old logic against a new and audacious vision. Victor didn't break eye contact, his gaze daring each of them to doubt him. He wasn't asking for permission. He was giving them one last chance to embark on his journey. Finally, Beatrice Lacerda broke the deadlock. A slow, calculated smile formed on her lips. A luxury residential building with a social purpose and a redemption story for the media. It's risky. It's bold. She looked at Victor, a new respect in her eyes. And it's absolutely brilliant, count me in. One by one, with Victor's personal guarantee and Beatrice's validation, most of the other investors gave in, reluctance transforming into greedy curiosity. Only Bastos and Ishikawa remained unyielding. I'm out, said Bastos, rising abruptly. I want my capital back. You've gone mad, Mendez. Great, replied Victor without blinking. My lawyers will contact you to formalize the purchase of your stake. Ishikawa. Kenji Ishikawa remained seated for a long moment. He looked at the blank hologram, then at Victor. I'm not leaving. I'm staying, and I'll be watching your every move. At the first sign of failure, I myself will lead the board in removing you from command. Fair enough, said Victor with a nod. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. He had confronted his peers and bent the business world to his new will. He had risked everything he had built, not for a profit calculation, but for a conviction born on a cold morning, in a poor living room. He had left that room not only with the approval of a new project, but with a new purpose, forged in the fire of empathy, and tested against the harshest of resistances, the greed of men like himself. 2 years. In Victor Mendez's world, 2 years was the time it took for an investment cycle to mature, for a steel tower to rise from the ground, for interest to compound into a satisfactory sum. But the 2 years that had passed since that transformative night at the Silvers' house were measured in a different metric. They were measured in doses of chemotherapy, replaced by effective dialysis sessions, in sleepless nights exchanged for peaceful sleep, and in the worry lines that slowly softened on the faces of Roberto and Marta Silva. The inauguration day of the Novo Amanheca Residential dawned with an unreal, limpid blue sky, the kind that looks like a special effect. The complex itself was a masterpiece of humanist architecture. The 2 residential towers, slender and elegant, didn't dominate the landscape but rather engaged with it, their balconies draped in vertical gardens and glass panels reflecting the sky. Between the towers, where a concrete podium might have been, lay a vast park with lawns, a playground and winding paths. To the right, discreetly integrated into the design, was the medical wing. It didn't have the cold, sterile look of a hospital. With its wood and glass facade, it resembled a luxury spa. Inside, the most advanced renal treatment technology was housed in suites overlooking the gardens, designed to remove the stigma and fear associated with the treatment. The atmosphere was one of quiet celebration. Residents, investors, doctors, and the press mingled on the lawn, serenaded by a gentle string quartet. Victor Mendez moved among them, but he wasn't the same man. The Italian suit was still there, impeccable, but the armor of arrogance had vanished. He smiled. He greeted people by name. He paused to listen. His eyes no longer scanned the environment for opportunities or threats. They lingered on people, on details. He saw Beatriz Lacerda chatting animatedly with the director of St. Luke's Hospital. He saw Kenji Ishikawa, his skeptical observer, standing near the entrance to the medical wing, his expression unreadable, studying the flow of people. And then he saw them. Near the playground was the Silva family. They were like a photograph of the after, the personification of the purpose of it all. Roberto, in a smart facilities manager uniform, greeted guests with quiet confidence. His wife, Marta, whom Victor had only known through Sophia's stories, stood beside him radiant, her eyes shining with happy tears as she watched her children. And the children? The sight of them made Victor's heart contract. Lucas, now 8, was no longer a pale, frail figure in a bed. With rosy cheeks and a haircut, he chased a soccer ball with other children, his laughter echoing through the air. He still had dialysis 3 times a week, but the sessions were quick, efficient, and a short walk from his home. The treatment had become a manageable part of his life, not the entirety of it. And Sophia. At 13, she had finally gotten her childhood back. She wore a floral dress, and her long hair was loose. The weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the lightness of adolescence. She wasn't on guard. She wasn't watching. She sat on the grass with a sketchbook on her lap, a new one, a gift from Victor, drawing the building, the sun, the people. The serious, tired look had been replaced by a curious, happy gleam. When it came time for the speeches, Victor was the last to be called to the stage. He walked slowly, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. His eyes scanned the important faces, the magnates and the press, and landed on the Silva family seated in the front row. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice clear and firm. 2 years ago, at this very spot, I planned to build a monument to ambition, a project called the Vertex Complex. It would have been tall, luxurious, and would have generated extraordinary profits. It would have been a success by the standards I knew. But today I look at this place and know with absolute certainty that that project would have been my greatest failure. A murmur rippled through the audience. Ishikawa leaned forward, attentive. Success, I've learned, isn't measured in square footage or numbers on a spreadsheet. It's not a tower we build to isolate ourselves from the world, but a bridge we build to connect to it. This place, the New Dawn residential complex, wasn't born from a market analysis. It was born from a lesson in humility. He paused, his eyes meeting Roberto's, who nodded slowly. 2 years ago, I came to this land to carry out an eviction. I saw the house that stood here not as a home, but as an obstacle. And within that obstacle, I found a family that taught me more about value, courage, and resilience than all my years in the business world. I found a father working himself to exhaustion, a mother dedicating every atom of her strength, and a boy fighting for life with silent bravery. His eyes fixed on Sophia, his voice choked for a moment, and I found an 11-year-old girl who was a giant, a child who carried the weight of an adult's responsibility with a grace and strength that shamed me. She wasn't just taking care of her brother, she was managing a fortress of love against all odds. On that day I realized that the true architect wasn't me, with my blueprints and my capital. The true architect of this dream was right there, building a foundation of hope where I only saw land to be cleared. Sophia, thank you. The tears Marta had been trying to hold back now flowed freely down her face. Sophia looked at Victor, surprised and moved, a slight blush on her cheeks. Therefore, Victor concluded, his voice echoing with passionate conviction, this complex is our attempt to honor that lesson. It's a place built on the premise that care is the greatest of luxuries and that community is our most valuable asset. May New Dawn not just be a name, but a promise we renew every day. The promise that it is possible, yes, to do business with a soul and build a future where no one is left behind. Thank you. The applause began, hesitant at first, then growing into a wave of sound that swept through the park. It wasn't a corporate, polished applause. It was genuine, emotional. Victor descended from the stage, bypassing the colleagues and press crowding around. He had only one destination. He stopped before the Silva family. Roberto, eyes brimming, extended his hand. "Mr. Mendez." "Victor, I'm speechless." "Roberto, the honor is all mine," Victor said, shaking his hand firmly. Marta only whispered a thank you that held a universe of gratitude. Victor then knelt down to Sophia's level. "Did you like your new notebook?" he asked, smiling. She nodded shyly. Then, with a decisive gesture, she turned the notebook and tore out the page she was drawing on. It was the building with the sun smiling down on it and 5 stick figures holding hands on the grass, 2 adults and 2 children, and a 5th figure, taller, slightly apart, but connected to them by a line. She extended the drawing to him. "It's for you," she said, "so you won't forget." Victor took the paper with the care he usually reserved for a multi-million-dollar contract. He looked at the simple, childlike drawing and felt a wave of emotion so strong it took his breath away. That piece of paper was his true final balance sheet, the testament to his deepest success. "I won't forget, Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse. "I promise." He stood up, holding the drawing like a trophy. In the distance, Lucas scored an imaginary goal and ran toward his sister, laughing, pulling her into play. Victor watched the two run together on the grass in the afternoon sun. He looked at the drawing in his hand, at the united and healed family, and at the magnificent building that was a testament to his own redemption. For the first time, Victor Mendez wasn't thinking about the next project, the next profit, the next conquest. He was simply there, present, at peace, and he smiled. A genuine smile without an agenda, the smile of a man who had demolished an empire of coldness to build a home.